The day I overheard my own daughter telling her husband that keeping me alive was costing them a fortune, I realized my family saw me as nothing more than a financial burden waiting to die. What they didn't know was that the frail old woman sleeping in their basement had $333 million sitting in offshore accounts, and I was about to teach them the most expensive lesson of their lives. My name is Margaret Chen, and at 78 years old, I've learned that money doesn't just talk, it screams the truth about people's character. But let me start from the beginning, because this story isn't just about wealth hidden in plain sight. It's about betrayal, unconditional love, and the kind of justice that money can buy when wielded by someone who's been underestimated her entire life. I moved into my daughter Susan's house in Pacific Heights, San Francisco, 3 years ago after my husband Richard passed away. The official story was that I could no longer manage on my own, that my trembling hands and failing eyesight made independent living dangerous. The truth, I was perfectly capable, but I wanted to be close to my family in what I thought would be my golden years. I wanted to watch my grandchildren grow, to share meals around a table, to feel like I belonged somewhere after Richard left this world. Susan's house was one of those gorgeous Victorian mansions that screamed old money with its pristine white facade and perfectly manicured garden. Her husband, Bradley Whitmore, was a corporate attorney who wore his ambition like expensive cologne, too much and impossible to ignore. They had 2 children, 17-year-old Marcus, who spent most of his time glued to his phone or hanging out with kids who drove cars worth more than most people's houses, and 14-year-old Emma, who had inherited her father's coldness and her mother's talent for cruelty disguised as concern. If you're enjoying this story and want to see how Margaret's plan unfolds, hit that subscribe button right now. We're working toward our goal of 1,000 subscribers, and your support makes all the difference. Just click that red subscribe button below. It takes 2 seconds and helps this channel grow. They put me in the basement. Not a finished, comfortable basement with proper heating and windows, but a dimly lit space with concrete floors and walls that sweated moisture during San Francisco's foggy nights. Susan called it a garden-level apartment when she showed it to me, but we both knew it was a basement. The bed was a hand-me-down with springs that dug into my back. The bathroom had a toilet that ran constantly, and the single window near the ceiling provided just enough natural light to remind me that life was happening above me, without me. I pretended not to notice the way Susan's smile never quite reached her eyes when she checked on me, or how Bradley would calculate something on his mental ledger every time I needed a prescription filled. I played the role of the grateful, diminishing mother who knew her place and didn't ask for too much. And every night, I would lie on that uncomfortable bed and think about the fortune I'd built in secret, wondering if my family would treat me differently if they knew. You see, Richard and I started with nothing. We immigrated from Taiwan in the 1960s with 2 suitcases and dreams bigger than our common sense. Richard worked 3 jobs while I cleaned houses and took care of other people's children. We saved every penny we could, and when we finally scraped together enough to buy a small corner store in the Sunset District, we worked 18-hour days to make it successful. But the real money came from my side hustle, something Richard never fully understood or approved of. I started investing in real estate in the early 70s, buying rundown properties in neighborhoods everyone else dismissed as too dangerous or too far from the city center. I had a gift for seeing potential where others saw only problems. I would buy a property, fix it up with my own hands when I could, rent it out, and then use the rental income to buy another property. Rinse and repeat. By the time the tech boom hit San Francisco in the 90s, I owned 47 properties in areas that suddenly became prime real estate. The Asian kid who used to throw newspapers at my porch became a billionaire tech entrepreneur. The empty lot down the street where teenagers used to drink beer became the headquarters for a startup that sold for $800 million. The neighborhood everyone called sketchy became the hottest zip code in the city. I sold most of my properties at the peak of the market, right before the 2008 crash, because I've always had a sixth sense for when things are about to go wrong. That instinct, combined with aggressive but smart investments in emerging tech companies, international stocks, and yes, even cryptocurrency before most people knew what Bitcoin was, turned my modest real estate earnings into a fortune that would make most professional investors weep with envy. Richard knew I did well with real estate, but I never told him the exact numbers. It wasn't about hiding it from him. It was about protecting him from the weight of it. He was a simple man who found joy in a good meal and a weekend spent tending to his garden. Knowing we had hundreds of millions would have changed him, and I loved him exactly as he was. When Richard died, I was devastated. But I was also free to do something I'd been planning for years. I wanted to see who my family really was beneath the polite smiles and obligatory phone calls. So I played poor. I claimed Richard's medical bills had depleted our savings. I said the life insurance barely covered the funeral. I mentioned, with practiced sadness, that I might need to sell our house just to afford a modest retirement. Your subscription really helps this channel reach more people. We're so close to hitting 1,000 subscribers, and every single one matters. If you haven't already, please click that subscribe button and join our growing community. It's completely free and takes just a moment. Susan's reaction told me everything I needed to know. Instead of offering financial help, she offered me the basement. Instead of suggesting ways to supplement my income, she started talking about budget-friendly meals and hinting that some of my medications might not be absolutely necessary. Bradley began making comments about the burden of elder care and how expensive it was to support multiple generations under one roof. But my grandson, 12-year-old Tommy at the time, was different. Tommy was Susan's youngest, born late in her life, and treated more like an inconvenient accident than a blessing. He had his father's dark hair and his mother's sharp features. But his eyes had the kindness I remembered from my own mother. He reminded me why I'd worked so hard to build something in this country. Tommy started visiting me in the basement regularly. At first, I thought Susan had sent him to check on me, to make sure I hadn't died and started smelling up the house. But I quickly realized he came because he wanted to. He would sit on the floor next to my bed, since there was only one chair in the entire space, and he would talk to me about school, about the books he was reading, about his dreams of becoming an architect, and designing buildings that made people feel something. He noticed things the others didn't. He noticed when I skipped meals, because Susan had forgotten to save me dinner. He noticed when I wore the same sweater 3 days in a row because my laundry had been accidentally left wet in the washing machine for so long it mildewed and had to be thrown out. He noticed when my hands shook, not from age, but from the cold that seeped into that basement every night. Tommy started bringing me things. A warmer blanket from the linen closet upstairs, claiming nobody used it anymore. Extra food from dinner, wrapped in napkins and smuggled down before his mother could comment on the portions. Books from his own collection, because he knew I loved to read, and the basement had no television, no radio, nothing but silence and my own thoughts. One afternoon, about 6 months after I moved in, Tommy came downstairs looking troubled. He sat on the floor, pulled his knees to his chest, and said, "Grandma, why are you really living down here? This can't be what you want." I smiled at him, this sweet boy who saw through the family's carefully constructed narrative. Sometimes, Tommy, we accept situations not because we have no choice, but because we're waiting to see what we learn from them. Do you understand? He frowned, processing this, and then nodded slowly. You're testing them, aren't you? Mom and Dad and Marcus and Emma. You're seeing who they really are. If this story is resonating with you, show your support by subscribing to the channel. We're building something special here, working toward that 1,000 subscriber milestone, and you can be part of it. Hit that subscribe button. It really does make a difference. Smart kid. Too smart. I didn't confirm or deny his theory, but from that moment on, Tommy became my ally in ways I never expected. He started paying attention to how his family treated me, and I could see the disappointment growing in his eyes every time his mother complained about the cost of my medications, or his father made a joke about the financial drain in the basement. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in March, almost 3 years after I moved in. The San Francisco fog was rolling in thick that night. and I could hear it in the way the house creaked and settled. I'd gone upstairs to use the main bathroom because the toilet in my basement bathroom had finally given up the ghost completely, and nobody had bothered to call a plumber despite my mentioning it 3 times. As I walked past the kitchen, I heard voices. Susan and Bradley were having one of their private conversations that they assumed I couldn't hear because I was old and therefore must be deaf. "I'm serious, Bradley. We need to talk about your mother," Susan said. And I could hear the exhaustion in her voice, the kind that comes from carrying a burden you resent. "She's your mother," Bradley corrected, with the pedantic precision that probably served him well in court, but made him insufferable at home. "Fine, my mother. Do you know how much her prescriptions cost us last month? $843. That's on top of food, utilities, the increased insurance premiums, everything. She's burning through our savings." I stood perfectly still in the hallway, barely breathing. Bradley sighed, and I heard the clink of ice in a glass, probably his nightly bourbon. "What do you want me to say, Susan? We can't exactly put her on the street. The optics would be terrible, especially with my partnership review coming up." "I'm not suggesting we put her on the street," Susan snapped, "but there are facilities. Nice places where she could be with people her own age, where professional staff could handle her needs. It might even be better for her. Those places cost money too. Good ones cost more than we're spending now." "Then maybe we don't go with a good one." The coldness in Susan's voice made my blood run cold. "She's 78, Bradley. How much longer can she really have? Another year? 2? Is it worth bankrupting ourselves for someone who's already lived a full life?" There it was. The truth I'd been waiting to hear, the confirmation of what I'd suspected since the day they showed me to that basement room with fake enthusiasm and promises of it being temporary. "You're talking about your mother," Bradley said, but there was no real rebuke in his tone, just a statement of fact. "I'm talking about our financial future. I'm talking about Marcus's college fund, and Emma's writing lessons, and the vacation we've been putting off for 3 years. I'm talking about us, Bradley. When does our life get to matter more than prolonging hers?" I heard Tommy's voice before I saw him. He'd come up behind me so quietly I hadn't noticed, and when he spoke, his voice cracked with emotion. "Grandma? Subscribe now if you want to see how Tommy and Margaret handle this heartbreaking moment. Your subscription helps us share stories that matter, and we're so close to reaching 1,000 subscribers. Click that button and be part of our journey." Susan and Bradley stopped talking immediately. I turned to see Tommy standing there, tears streaming down his face, having clearly heard the same conversation I had. In that moment, something shifted. I'd been content to observe, to gather evidence of my family's true nature, like a scientist conducting a long-term study. But seeing Tommy's pain, seeing him realize that the family he'd been born into valued money over humanity, made me angry in a way I hadn't felt in decades. I put my finger to my lips, signaling Tommy to be quiet, and I gestured for him to follow me downstairs. We went to my basement room, and I closed the door gently behind us. Tommy collapsed onto my bed, his shoulders shaking with sobs. "How can they talk about you like that?" he choked out between breaths. "Like you're just an expense to manage? Like your life doesn't matter?" I sat next to him and put my arm around his shoulders. "Tommy, I need to tell you something, but you have to promise me you'll keep it secret for a little while longer. Can you do that?" He looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes and nodded. "I'm not poor, Tommy. I never was. Your mother and her husband think I am, but the truth is very different." I paused, watching his face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and then something like hope. "I have more money than you can probably imagine. Enough that I could buy this house 50 times over and still have plenty left. But I've been pretending to be broke because I wanted to see who in this family actually loves me for me, not for what I could give them." Tommy stared at me, processing this information. "You're rich?" "Very." "Then why are you living in a basement? Why are you letting them treat you like this?" "Because now I know the truth," I said simply. "And soon, they will too." Over the next few weeks, I set my plan in motion with the precision of a military operation. First, I called my lawyer, David Huang, whom I'd worked with for 30 years and trusted implicitly. I hadn't told him about my living situation, and when I finally explained it during a meeting at his downtown office, his reaction was priceless. "Margaret, you're telling me that you, a woman worth $333 million, have been living in your daughter's basement while she complains about the cost of your medications?" David looked like he might have a stroke. "This is insane. You could buy an entire senior living community if you wanted, a luxurious one, in Hawaii." "I know what I could do, David. Now let me tell you what I'm going to do." I laid out my plan, and David listened with the intensity he usually reserved for multi-million-dollar corporate mergers. When I finished, he sat back in his leather chair and smiled. "Margaret, you're absolutely diabolical. I love it. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the moment when Margaret reveals her plan. We're working hard to hit that 1,000 subscriber mark, and every subscription tells us you want more content like this. Click subscribe now." The plan had multiple phases. Phase 1 was documentation. I had Tommy help me record conversations using a small digital recorder I'd ordered online. We captured Susan complaining about my medical costs. We recorded Bradley suggesting they might reduce the quality of my food to save money, actually proposing generic brands and smaller portions as if I were a budget line item to be optimized. We documented Emma making cruel jokes about how I smelled or how my hands shook, and Marcus laughing along as if my deterioration were entertainment. The only voice missing from these recordings was Tommy's, because he'd stopped participating in the casual cruelty that had become his family's background noise. Phase 2 was reorganization of my assets. I worked with David to create a new trust structure, one that would protect my wealth and ensure it went to people who actually deserved it. I made Tommy the primary beneficiary of a trust that would give him $5 million when he turned 18, enough to pay for the best education in the world and set him up for life. Another $5 million would be held in trust for him to access at 25, and another $5 at 35. The remaining $318 million would be split between various charities focused on elder care, immigrant rights, and affordable housing, all causes close to my heart. Susan would receive exactly $1, as would Bradley, Marcus, and Emma, to make it clear they were not forgotten but deliberately excluded. Phase 3 was the most satisfying. I planned a family dinner, insisting through Tommy that I had an important announcement to make. Susan was annoyed, I could tell, because important announcements from broke old ladies rarely lead anywhere good. But she agreed, probably hoping I was going to announce I'd decided to move into a state-run nursing home and relieve them of their burden. The dinner was scheduled for a Saturday in late April. The weather had turned beautiful, with that perfect San Francisco spring sunshine that makes you forget the city is foggy 10 months out of the year. Susan went all out, probably figuring it would be the last meal she'd have to serve me. She made roast chicken, which was actually cooked properly for once, roasted vegetables, and even a dessert, apple pie from the fancy bakery on Union Street. We gathered around the dining room table, a massive thing made of reclaimed wood that Bradley had paid a fortune for to prove he appreciated artisanal craftsmanship, or whatever story he told himself. Susan sat at one end, Bradley at the other, with Marcus and Emma on one side and Tommy and me on the other. The seating arrangement felt symbolic, the aligned family versus the outcasts. If you want to see how this dinner unfolds, subscribe to the channel right now. Your support means everything as we work toward 1,000 subscribers, and you'll get notified every time we post a new story. Hit that subscribe button. Susan served the food with practiced efficiency, and for the first few minutes, we ate in awkward silence. Finally, Bradley cleared his throat. "So, Margaret, you said you had an announcement." I set down my fork carefully and looked around the table. "I do. I wanted to gather you all here because there's something important I need to share. Something that affects all of you." Susan and Bradley exchanged glances. Emma looked bored. Marcus was scrolling through his phone under the table, thinking I couldn't see. Only Tommy was paying attention. His eyes locked on mine with a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. "I'm moving out," I said simply. Susan's face lit up with barely concealed relief. "Oh? Have you found a place? Do you need help with the arrangements? Because I know some very affordable facilities that—" "I've bought a place," I interrupted. "In Pacific Heights, actually. Just 3 blocks from here. 6 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms. Completely renovated. I closed on it last week." The silence that followed was deafening. Susan's fork clattered onto her plate. Bradley's face went from polite interest to confusion, to something like panic. Even Marcus looked up from his phone. "I'm sorry, what?" Susan finally managed. "You bought a house in Pacific Heights? That's impossible. You don't have that kind of money. You said you were broke." "I never said I was broke, Susan. You assumed I was broke, and I let you assume it because I wanted to see how you'd treat me if you thought I had nothing to give you." Bradley found his voice. "Margaret, buying a house in Pacific Heights costs millions. If you had that kind of money, why have you been living in our basement? Why have we been paying for your medications and food?" "You've been paying for my medications?" I smiled. "David, could you come in now?" David Huang walked in from the kitchen where he'd been waiting, carrying a briefcase and wearing an expression of professional neutrality that barely concealed his amusement. "Good evening, everyone. I'm David Huang, Mrs. Chen's attorney." "What is this?" Susan demanded, her voice rising. "Some kind of ambush?" "Not an ambush," I said calmly. "A reckoning. David, would you please share the financial documentation we discussed?" David opened his briefcase and pulled out several folders, which he distributed around the table. "These are summaries of Mrs. Chen's financial holdings, as of yesterday's market close. As you'll see, her net worth is approximately $333 million, including real estate, stocks, bonds, and various other investments. We're at such a crucial part of the story. If you're loving this, show your support by subscribing. Every subscriber helps us reach that goal of 1,000, and it only takes a second to click that button. Subscribe now. I watched their faces as they opened the folders and saw the numbers. Susan went pale. Bradley's hands actually shook as he flipped through the pages. Marcus and Emma looked confused, too young to fully grasp what $333 million actually meant, but old enough to know it was more money than they'd ever see in their lifetimes. "This is impossible," Susan whispered. "Where did all this come from?" "From hard work, smart investing, and spending 50 years building something while living below my means," I said. "Your father knew I did well, but even he didn't know the full extent. I built this fortune quietly, carefully, and I protected it." "And you let us think you were poor?" Bradley's voice was tight with anger. "You let us pay for your medications, your food, your care, when you could have been paying for everything yourself? Do you have any idea how much we've spent?" "Actually, I do." I pulled out another folder. This one Tommy had helped me prepare. "According to my calculations, you've spent approximately $23,000 on my care over the past 3 years. That includes medications, food, utilities for the basement, and the one doctor's visit you actually took me to." $23,000 is a lot of money," Susan protested. "It's a rounding error," David interjected. "Mrs. Chen makes more than that in investment returns every few hours." "But you didn't know that," I continued. "You thought I was broke, and still, $23,000 over 3 years was too much. You put me in a basement with a broken toilet and mildewed walls. You complained about every prescription, every meal. You discussed within my earshot whether keeping me alive was worth the cost." Susan's face crumbled. "You heard that?" "We both did," Tommy said quietly, speaking up for the first time. I heard you and Dad talking about Grandma like she was a budget problem to solve. Like her life didn't matter as much as your vacation or Emma's riding lessons. Tommy, that's not fair, Susan started, but I cut her off. It's completely fair. You showed me exactly who you are when you thought I had nothing. And now I'm showing you the consequences of that choice. Consequences? Bradley's voice had an edge of fear now. What are you talking about? David pulled out more documents. Mrs. Chen has established a comprehensive trust structure for her estate. The primary beneficiary is Tommy Chen Whitmore, who will receive phased distributions totaling $15 million at ages 18, 25, and 35. The remainder of the estate will be distributed to various charitable organizations. What about me? Susan's voice was barely a whisper. I'm your daughter. What about Marcus and Emma? They're your grandchildren. Susan? Marcus, Emma, and Bradley will each receive $1 from the estate to make it clear they have not been forgotten, but deliberately excluded based on their treatment of Mrs. Chen during her time in their home. The explosion of emotion that followed was predictable but still somehow shocking. Susan burst into tears. Genuine ones, I think. Though whether she was crying about the money or about being confronted with her own cruelty, I couldn't tell. Bradley started shouting about undue influence and mental competency. Threats he'd later learn were completely toothless since I'd had full psychological evaluations done specifically to prevent such challenges. Marcus and Emma looked stunned, their teenage brains trying to calculate how much money they'd just lost. Emma actually had the audacity to say, "But I need that money for college," as if she'd ever shown me a moment of kindness that would make her deserve it. This is such a powerful moment in Margaret's story. If you want to support content like this, please subscribe to the channel. We're so close to 1,000 subscribers, and your click makes a real difference. Subscribe now and join our community. Only Tommy was smiling, a sad, knowing smile that showed he understood this was about more than money. It was about dignity, about worth, about the message that you can't treat people as disposable and expect to be rewarded for it. You can't do this, Susan said, her tears mixing with anger now. I'm your daughter. I took care of you. You stored me in your basement like an unwanted piece of furniture, I corrected. You fed me scraps and complained about the cost of keeping me alive. Tommy took care of me. Tommy brought me warm blankets and extra food. Tommy sat with me and talked to me like I was a person, not a burden. Tommy saw me. So you're rewarding him and punishing us? Bradley demanded. I'm teaching you a lesson worth more than $333 million, I said. I'm teaching you that people have value beyond what they can provide you financially. That dignity and kindness matter more than convenience. That your mother, your grandmother, is a human being deserving of respect, not a line item on your budget. I stood up from the table, my hands steady, my voice clear. I'm moving out tomorrow. Tommy, you're welcome to visit me anytime. In fact, you're welcome to live with me if you'd like, though I know you have a few more years of high school to finish. The rest of you are not welcome in my new home unless you can demonstrate genuine remorse and changed behavior, and even then, I make no promises. David and I left together, leaving behind a family in chaos. Tommy walked us to the door, and I hugged him tight. Thank you for seeing me, I whispered. Thank you for being who you are. Thank you for teaching me that kindness matters more than money, he whispered back. Even when you're pretending not to have any. The next few months were glorious. I moved into my new home, a stunning Victorian with original details and modern updates, including a chef's kitchen I actually knew how to use, and a library with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a garden I planned to fill with vegetables and flowers. I hired a daily housekeeper, not because I needed one, but because I could, and because Maria, the woman I hired, was a recent immigrant who reminded me of my younger self and needed the opportunity. Tommy came over 3 or 4 times a week. We cooked together, read together, talked about architecture and design and all the things he wanted to create in the world. I hired a private tutor to help him with advanced mathematics, and I started introducing him to architects and developers in my network who could mentor him. Susan tried to reach out several times, tearful apologies mixed with transparent attempts to get back into my good graces, and presumably, my will. I responded to her messages with polite but firm boundaries. If she wanted a relationship with me, it would be built on genuine connection, not financial expectation. So far, she hadn't been able to make that shift. Bradley sent legal threats for a few weeks, until his own attorneys explained that I'd done everything by the book, and that his case would be laughed out of court. Marcus and Emma sent awkward text messages that Tommy told me were forced by their parents, obligations rather than genuine outreach. But Tommy flourished. With the security of knowing his education and future were taken care of, he became even more focused and driven. He talked about designing affordable housing for seniors, buildings with dignity and beauty that proved low cost didn't have to mean low quality. He'd learned the lesson I'd hoped he would, that wealth is a tool for creating change, not a measure of a person's worth. Subscribe now if you've been inspired by Margaret's story. Your subscription helps us keep creating content that matters, and we're so close to hitting 1,000 subscribers. Click that button and be part of something meaningful. One evening, about 6 months after I moved out, Tommy and I were sitting in my garden, watching the San Francisco fog roll in. He turned to me and asked, "Grandma, do you regret it, giving away so much money to charity instead of leaving it to family?" I thought about his question carefully. Tommy, I've learned that family isn't defined by blood or obligation. It's defined by love, respect, and presence. You've been more family to me in the last 3 years than Susan has been in the last 30. The money is going to places where it will help people who are struggling the way I once struggled. People who are dismissed and underestimated because of their age or their circumstances. That feels right to me. And the part of the plan where you let them think you were broke? Do you regret that? Not for a second, I said honestly. It showed me the truth. And truth, even painful truth, is always valuable. Tommy nodded, processing this. I think I want to do something similar someday. Not the pretending to be broke part, but the using money to reveal truth and create change part. Then you've learned the right lesson, I told him, reaching over to squeeze his hand. As the fog rolled in thicker, obscuring the city lights in the distance, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not because I had money, though financial security certainly didn't hurt. Not because I'd gotten revenge, though there was satisfaction in watching karma work its magic. But because I'd found my true family in the most unexpected place. In a grandson who saw value in a person everyone else had written off. The money, the houses, the investments, all of it mattered less than that. All of it was just a tool to reveal what really mattered. Human connection, dignity, and the choice to see people as more than what they can provide. $333 million couldn't buy love or respect or genuine human kindness. But it could reveal who had those qualities all along, and who had just been pretending while waiting for an inheritance. And in the end, that revelation was worth every penny I'd ever earned. As I sit here now in my beautiful home, surrounded by books and light and the sound of Tommy laughing in the kitchen as he tries to perfect his grandmother's recipe for soup dumplings, I realize that this is what wealth really looks like. Not the number in a bank account, but the richness of a life lived with integrity, surrounded by people who value you for who you are, not what you have. Susan still doesn't understand this, and maybe she never will. But Tommy does, and that's enough. That's everything. The fog has completely obscured the view now, wrapping my house in a cool embrace. Inside, it's warm and bright and full of life. Tommy calls out, asking if I want extra ginger in the dumplings, and I call back yes. Always yes to more flavor, more zest, more life. Before we wrap up, I want to remind you one more time to subscribe to this channel. We're building a community of people who love real stories about real choices and real consequences, Every subscription gets us closer to that 1,000 subscriber goal. Click that subscribe button now, and thank you for being here. This is what I want people to know. Your worth isn't determined by your bank balance or your age or your usefulness to others. Your worth is inherent, unchangeable, absolute. And if the people around you can't see that, if they measure your value by what you cost or what you can provide, then the problem isn't your worth. The problem is their vision. I learned that lesson in a basement with concrete floors and mildewed walls. I learned it from a teenage boy who brought me blankets and books when everyone else brought resentment and calculation. I learned it by pretending to have nothing and discovering who would still treat me like I was everything. $333 million was the price of that education, and I'd pay it again in a heartbeat. Because now I know. I know who my real family is. I know what matters. I know that wealth without humanity is just numbers on a page, but humanity with or without wealth is everything. Tommy brings out the dumplings, perfectly steamed, the dough translucent and delicate. We eat together in comfortable silence, and I think about how far we've both come. Him from a family that didn't see his worth to a future bright with possibility. Me from a basement to a home, from being invisible to being seen. The greatest gift I ever gave myself wasn't the fortune I built. It was the courage to test whether anyone loved me without it. And the greatest gift I received was discovering that one person, the one who mattered most, did. That's worth more than all the money in the world. Plus, plus, pups. Tommy graduated from high school with honors 2 years after that revelatory dinner, and I attended his graduation ceremony sitting in the front row, beaming with pride while Susan, Bradley, Marcus, and Emma sat awkwardly several rows back. The division in our family had become geographic, emotional, and permanent. Tommy had chosen to stay living with his parents through high school, partly because he didn't want to disrupt his education, and partly because he said someone needed to be there to remind them of their mistakes. That kid had wisdom beyond his years. The college acceptance letters started rolling in that spring, and Tommy got into every single school he applied to. MIT, Cornell, UC Berkeley, Stanford, you name it. He chose Stanford, not just because of their renowned architecture program, but because it meant he could stay close to me. We celebrated his acceptance at my favorite dim sum restaurant in Chinatown, just the two of us, eating hargao and siu mai while planning his future. I've been thinking about my trust fund, Tommy said, dipping a dumpling in soy sauce. The $5 million I get when I turn 18. What about it? I asked, watching his face carefully. Money changes people, and I wanted to see if it would change him. I don't need all of it. I need some for school, but Stanford gave me a partial scholarship, and you've already said you'd help with the rest. So I was thinking, what if I used a chunk of it to start a foundation? Something focused on improving living conditions for seniors, especially immigrant seniors who don't have family support. I had to set down my chopsticks because my hands were shaking, but this time from emotion, not age. Tell me more. I've been researching elder care facilities, especially the ones that serve low-income communities. Grandma, the conditions in some of these places would make your basement look like a luxury suite. People who worked their whole lives, who built this country, living in rooms with broken heating, eating food that's barely nutritious, being treated like they're already dead. It's not right. If you're moved by Tommy's compassion and want to see where his foundation leads, make sure you're subscribed. We're still working toward that 1,000 subscriber goal, and your support means everything. Click subscribe right now. So you want to start a foundation to improve these facilities? I asked. Not just improve them. I want to reimagine them. Use my architecture training to design spaces that give people dignity, that make them feel valued. And I want to fund upgrades to existing facilities, train staff to treat residents with respect, create programs that connect seniors with their communities. I've been sketching designs, writing business plans, the whole thing. I looked at my grandson, this remarkable young man who could have taken his inheritance and bought cars or traveled the world, or done any of the selfish things most 18-year-olds would do with sudden wealth. Instead, he wanted to fix the exact problem that had nearly broken me. "I think that's the best idea I've heard in years," I said, "and I'd like to match whatever you invest, dollar for dollar." Tommy's eyes widened. "Grandma, that could be millions. I have millions, and I can't think of a better use for them than supporting your vision. But I have one condition." "What's that?" "You let me help. I don't just mean financially. I mean let me be involved, use my experience, my connections, my knowledge of what it's like to be old and invisible. Make me a partner in this." Tommy reached across the table and grabbed my hand. "Grandma, I was counting on it. I can design the buildings, but you know what it feels like to live in them. Your perspective is the whole point." We spent the rest of that meal planning, scheming, imagining a world where getting old didn't mean losing your dignity. And for the first time since Richard died, I felt like I had a purpose beyond just existing and revealing people's true natures. Tommy turned 18 that summer, and we officially launched the Chen Foundation for Elder Dignity. The name was his idea, using my maiden name to honor where I came from and what I'd survived. We started small, partnering with 3 elder care facilities in the Bay Area to implement design improvements and staff training programs. Tommy worked with architects and designers to create warmer, more human spaces, replacing institutional fluorescent lighting with natural light, adding comfortable gathering spaces, creating gardens where residents could grow vegetables and flowers. But the real magic was in the training program. We brought in psychologists, social workers, and yes, seniors themselves, to teach staff how to see their residents as whole people with histories and preferences and feelings. We paid staff better, which meant we could attract better people. People who chose elder care because they cared, not because it was the only job available. The results were immediate and dramatic. Depression rates dropped. Family visits increased because the facilities became places people wanted to be, not places they avoided out of guilt and sadness. Residents started participating in activities, sharing stories, teaching skills to younger generations through volunteer programs Tommy organized with local schools. The media noticed. We started getting coverage in local papers, then national outlets. The San Francisco Chronicle ran a feature story about the foundation with a photo of Tommy and me standing in one of the renovated facilities, surrounded by smiling residents. The headline was, "18-year-old and his grandmother revolutionize elder care." Susan called me after that article ran, the first time I'd heard from her in over a year. Subscribe now to follow the Chen Foundation's journey and see how Susan responds to her mother's success. We're so close to 1,000 subscribers, and every click helps us share stories that matter. Hit that button. "I saw the article," she said, her voice tight. "You and Tommy are famous now." "We're not famous, Susan. We're just doing work that matters. Work funded by money that should have been mine." There it was, the real reason for her call. Not pride in what her son was accomplishing, not curiosity about the foundation, just resentment about the inheritance she felt entitled to. "Money that you would have spent on what exactly? Another vacation? A bigger house you don't need?" "Susan, when I lived in your basement, when I had nothing as far as you knew, you treated me like garbage. You complained about every dollar you spent on me. You discussed whether my life was worth the cost. And now you're upset that Tommy, who brought me blankets and food and kindness when I had nothing, is using his inheritance to help other people avoid what I went through." Silence on the other end of the line. Then, "It's still not fair." "You're right, it's not fair. It's not fair that people who work their whole lives end up in facilities where they're neglected and disrespected. It's not fair that aging is treated as a disease instead of a natural part of life. It's not fair that I had to pretend to be broke to find out if anyone in my family actually loved me. But you know what, Susan? I'm not interested in fair. I'm interested in right. And what Tommy and I are doing is right. He's my son," she said, and I could hear tears in her voice now. "You've turned him against me. I haven't turned him against anyone. I just showed him by example what happens when you value people for who they are instead of what they have. He's making his own choices, and those choices reflect the kind of person he's become despite the example you and Bradley set, not because of it. I hung up after that, not cruelly, but firmly. I'd spent 3 years in a basement learning that some people will never understand that wealth means nothing without humanity. Susan was one of those people, and I'd made peace with it. Tommy started at Stanford that fall, and I watched him balance his architecture studies with running the foundation with a grace that astounded me. He'd hired a small staff, mostly young social workers and nonprofit veterans who believed in the mission. He'd expanded our partnerships to 15 facilities across California, and he'd started speaking at conferences, this barely 19-year-old kid with more wisdom about aging and dignity than most professionals twice his age. But he still made time for me. Every Sunday we had dinner together, alternating between my house and restaurants we wanted to try. We talked about his classes, the foundation's growth, his struggles with organic chemistry, which apparently even architecture students had to take, and his dreams for the future. One Sunday evening, as we walked through Golden Gate Park after dinner, Tommy brought up something that had clearly been on his mind. "Grandma, can I ask you something personal?" "Always." "Do you ever regret the way you handled everything with Mom and Dad? I mean, I know they deserved it, but do you ever wish you'd just told them the truth from the beginning? That you'd given them a chance to treat you right knowing you had money?" I thought about this carefully, because it was a good question, a fair question. Here's what I believe. Tommy, if someone only treats you well because of what you have, they're not really treating you well. They're investing in a potential return. Your mother, if she'd known I had money, she would have put me in the best room in the house, bought me the finest medications, taken me to the best doctors. But she wouldn't have done it because she loved me or valued me. She would have done it to stay in my good graces, to protect her inheritance. So you think she's incapable of real love? I think she's lost the ability to separate love from transaction. Maybe she wasn't always that way. Maybe somewhere along the line, living in Pacific Heights and marrying into Bradley's world and keeping up with people who measure worth in dollar signs, maybe all of that changed her. Or maybe it just revealed who she always was, and I was too busy working and raising her to notice. Make sure you're subscribed to see how this family story continues to unfold. Every subscription gets us closer to our goal of 1,000, and it lets us know you value these real, human stories. Subscribe now. That's sad, Tommy said quietly. It is sad, but you know what's not sad? You. The foundation. The hundreds of seniors whose lives we're improving every year. The model we're creating that other organizations are starting to copy. That's not sad at all. That's beautiful. The Chen Foundation continued to grow. By the time Tommy was a junior at Stanford, we were operating in 4 states and had influenced policy changes in elder care regulations in California. I donated another $20 million to expand the foundation's reach, and Tommy had attracted additional donors who believed in the mission. We weren't just renovating facilities anymore. We were building new ones from the ground up, designed with input from seniors, staff, and families, creating spaces that felt like communities rather than warehouses for the old. I went with Tommy to the opening of our first fully custom-designed facility in Sacramento. It was stunning, a 3-story building that didn't look institutional at all. It looked like an upscale apartment complex, with private rooms that had big windows, shared kitchens where residents could cook if they wanted to, art studios, a library, a garden with raised beds so people in wheelchairs could garden comfortably, and common spaces designed to encourage interaction without forcing it. We stood in the main lobby, watching residents move in with their families, and I saw something I'd never seen in the dozens of elder care facilities I'd visited over the years. People were smiling. Not forced smiles. Not obligatory smiles, but genuine expressions of relief and maybe even excitement. An elderly Vietnamese woman approached me, using a walker but moving with determination. "Are you Mrs. Chen?" she asked in accented English. "I am. I read about you, about what you did, living in the basement, teaching your family a lesson. My daughter, she wanted to put me in a cheap place, save money. But then she read about your foundation, about this place, and she felt ashamed. She brought me here instead, paid the extra. Thank you for making her feel ashamed. She needed it." I laughed, this wonderful, cathartic laugh that came from deep in my belly. "You're welcome. And welcome to your new home." She patted my hand with her weathered one, a hand that had probably worked as hard as mine over a long lifetime, and said, "You're a good troublemaker." Tommy overheard this and grinned at me after she walked away. "A good troublemaker. That should be your official title." "I prefer chairman of the board. Thank you very much." "Chairman Troublemaker it is." Marcus and Emma reached out around this time, both of them in college now, and apparently gaining some perspective on their teenage cruelty. The messages were tentative, apologetic, in a way that felt more genuine than their parents' attempts had been. Emma wrote a particularly moving email about how she'd taken a sociology class that discussed elder abuse and neglect, and how she'd realized, with horror, that she'd participated in exactly that kind of abuse in her own home. "I'm not asking for money or to be back in your will," she wrote. "I just want you to know that I understand now what I did, what we all did, and I'm sorry. I'm volunteering at a senior center near my college, trying to do something that might balance out even a tiny bit of the harm I caused. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed you to know that I'm different now. Or at least, I'm trying to be." I showed the email to Tommy, who'd maintained a cordial but distant relationship with his siblings. "What do you think?" I asked him. "I think people can change," he said carefully. "I think Emma was 14 and following Mom and Dad's example because that's what kids do. I think she's 20 now and figuring out who she wants to be independent of them. I think maybe she deserves a chance to prove she's learned something." "You're very wise for 21. I learned from the best troublemaker I know." I invited Emma to visit, just her, not Marcus, not yet, but her. She came to my house on a Saturday afternoon, nervous and formal in a way that reminded me of job interviews or first dates. We sat in my garden, and I made tea, and she cried while apologizing for everything. The jokes about how I smelled, the way she'd complained about my presence, the casual cruelty that teenagers are capable of when they don't yet understand the weight of their words. "I can't take back what I did," she said, mascara running down her face. "But I'm trying to be better. The work I'm doing at the senior center, it's shown me that old people, seniors. She stopped, frustrated with herself. "Old people is fine, Emma. I am old. That's not an insult unless you make it one." If this story of redemption and growth is touching your heart, please subscribe. We're working hard to reach 1,000 subscribers, and your support makes all the difference. Click that subscribe button now. "Old people," she started again, "are just young people who lived longer. They have the same feelings, the same need to be seen and valued." Mrs. Rodriguez at the center. She's 87, and she tells the funniest stories about working as a showgirl in Las Vegas in the 60s. Mr. Kim was a jazz musician who played with people I've actually heard of. These aren't just old bodies taking up space. These are people with whole lives behind them and feelings that matter just as much as mine. "It sounds like you've learned exactly the lesson I hoped you would," I said gently. "Though I wish you'd learned it without me having to live in a basement first." "I'm so sorry, Grandma." She was really sobbing now. "I'm so sorry I made you feel like you didn't matter. You matter so much. What you've built, what you and Tommy are doing, it's incredible. You're incredible." I reached across and took her hand. "Here's what I need you to understand, Emma. I forgive you because you were a child following your parents' terrible example. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean everything goes back to how it was. You're not back in my will, That's not changing. But you can be back in my life if you prove, through sustained action over time, that you've truly changed. Can you accept that?" She nodded, wiping her eyes. "That's more than I deserve." "Maybe, but it's what I'm offering." Emma started visiting regularly after that, helping with foundation events, volunteering her business major skills to help with fundraising and marketing. She was good at it, and more importantly, she was genuine. I watched her interact with the seniors at our facilities, and I saw real compassion, real interest, not the performative kindness people sometimes show when they're trying to get something. Marcus took longer to come around, but eventually, he did too. Sending a letter rather than an email, handwritten on actual paper, which I appreciated. His journey toward understanding was different from Emma's, but no less sincere. He'd graduated with a finance degree and was working at a wealth management firm, and he wrote about how many of his clients were elderly people trying to figure out how to make their money last, how to avoid being exploited by family members who saw them as ATMs. "Every time I meet with a client in their 70s or 80s, he wrote, "I think about how we treated you. I think about the fact that you had more money than any of my clients will ever see, and we treated you like you were worthless because we thought you were poor. It's made me reevaluate everything I thought I knew about value and worth and family. I'd like to talk to you if you're willing, not to ask for anything, just to learn from you, to understand how you built what you built, and maybe how I can use my position to protect other seniors from families like ours." I met with Marcus at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory. He'd grown up, filled out, lost the teenage smugness that had made him so insufferable. He asked thoughtful questions about my investment strategies, my real estate decisions, how I'd known when to sell and when to hold. But he also asked about the emotional side, how I'd dealt with being underestimated, how I'd maintained my sense of self when everyone around me treated me as less than. I use what happened to me as fuel, I told him honestly. Every time someone underestimated me because I was an Asian woman, or because I was old, or because I didn't fit their picture of what wealth looks like, I used it. I let it sharpen my instincts, strengthen my resolve. The world will always have people who judge you by the wrong criteria. Your job is to prove them wrong while staying true to who you are. Subscribe now if you want to see how Marcus applies these lessons. We're so grateful for every subscriber as we work toward our goal of 1,000. Your click matters, so hit that button. Marcus started sending me investment opportunities he thought might interest the foundation, deals that would grow our endowment and allow us to expand our reach. Some were good, some weren't. But I appreciated that he was thinking about us, trying to contribute in the way he knew how. Susan and Bradley remained the holdouts, too proud or too stubborn to admit they'd been wrong in any meaningful way. They sent obligatory birthday cards and holiday messages, but there was no real relationship there anymore, and I'd made peace with that. You can't force people to grow, and you can't make them value what they've lost if they don't have the capacity to understand what it was. The Foundation's 5th anniversary arrived, and we threw a massive celebration, bringing together residents from all our facilities, staff members, donors, and partners. The event was held at a beautiful venue in San Francisco, with speeches and awards and a video montage of stories from people whose lives had been changed by our work. Tommy gave a speech that brought me to tears. He talked about his grandmother, who'd taught him that dignity isn't something you earn with money or youth or productivity. It's something every human being deserves simply by being human. He talked about the lesson of the basement, how sometimes the hardest truths reveal the most important lessons. And he announced that he was committing another $5 million from his own trust fund to expand the foundation internationally, starting with elder care facilities in Taiwan, honoring my heritage and the journey that had brought our family to America. My grandmother likes to say she's a troublemaker, Tommy said to the crowd of over 300 people. But really, she's a revolutionary. She's revolutionizing how we think about aging, about worth, about what matters in life, and I'm honored to be her partner in this revolution. The applause was deafening. I looked around the room at all these people, staff and residents and volunteers and donors, all connected by a shared belief that every life has value regardless of age or wealth or productivity. This was what $333 million could buy when used with intention and heart. Emma and Marcus were both there, having volunteered to help organize the event. I watched them interact with residents, heard them laughing at stories, saw them treating every single person with respect and genuine interest. They'd learned. It had taken years, and they'd missed out on hundreds of millions of dollars in the process. But they'd learned. After the speeches, after the dinner, after most of the guests had left, Tommy, Emma, Marcus, and I sat together at one of the empty tables, looking out at the San Francisco skyline lit up against the night sky. "Grandma," Emma said quietly, "I know we're not in your will, and I understand why. But I want you to know that what you've built here, what you and Tommy have created, it's a better inheritance than money ever could be. You've taught us how to be better people. That's worth more than millions. Billions," Marcus corrected with a slight smile. "At the rate the Foundation's endowment is growing, we're talking billions eventually." "My point stands," Emma said. "Thank you for not giving up on us completely. Thank you for letting us back in, even just a little bit." I looked at my grandchildren, all three of them, each on their own journey toward becoming the people they were meant to be. "You're welcome. And who knows? Maybe someday, if you keep proving that you've truly changed, we'll revisit that $1 inheritance. Might bump it up to $2. They laughed, understanding I was mostly joking, but maybe, just maybe, leaving the door open a crack. Tommy raised his glass of champagne. "To Grandma, the best troublemaker, the wisest teacher, and the most patient revolutionary I know." We clinked glasses, and I felt something I'd been building toward for years: completion. Not in the sense of being done. I had plenty of life left to live and trouble to make, but in the sense of having come full circle. From that basement with its concrete floors and broken toilet to this moment, surrounded by people I loved and work that mattered, I'd traveled a long journey, and the best part, the journey wasn't over. There were more facilities to build, more lives to improve, more lessons to teach and learn. Tommy was already talking about expanding into Europe and Asia, creating a global model for elder care that prioritized dignity over profit. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was Susan. Saw the photos from the event. It looked beautiful. "I'm proud of what you've built, even if I wasn't part of building it." It wasn't an apology, not really. But it was something. An acknowledgement. A crack in the wall she'd built around her pride and resentment. I texted back, "Thank you. The door is always open if you're ready to walk through it as the person I hope you can become." I didn't expect a response, and I didn't get one that night. But maybe someday, people can surprise you, for better or worse. I'd learned that lesson in a basement, and I'd relearned it watching my grandchildren grow and change. The Foundation's work continued, expanding and evolving. We added programs for intergenerational connection, bringing school children into our facilities to learn from seniors, creating mentorship programs, oral history projects, art collaborations. We partnered with universities to train the next generation of elder care professionals, teaching them that caregiving is about preserving dignity, not just maintaining bodies. And through it all, I remained involved, not just as a funder, but as a participant. I visited facilities regularly, ate meals with residents, listened to their stories, incorporated their feedback into our designs and programs. I never wanted to forget what it felt like to be invisible, to be dismissed, to be valued only for what you could provide, rather than who you were. Because that memory, painful as it was, had become my superpower. It had revealed the truth about my family, yes. But more importantly, it had revealed the truth about what mattered. And armed with that truth and the resources to act on it, I'd built something that would outlive me, something that would continue to dignify lives long after I was gone. $333 million. A basement with concrete floors. A grandson who brought blankets and kindness. These were the ingredients of revolution, and I'd use them to change the world, one senior citizen at a time. Not bad for a broke old lady living in her daughter's basement. Not bad at all.